the logic engine, replacing emotional reactions with strategic responses. Hello, my friend. Let me ask you something real. How many times this week have you done something you knew wasn't smart, but you did it anyway because you were feeling a certain way? Maybe you snapped at someone you care about. Maybe you said yes to something when every fiber of your being knew you should have said no. Or maybe you stayed silent in a moment when speaking up could have changed everything. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your emotions are running the show, and most of the time, they're making decisions that your logical mind wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. I'm not talking about being emotional as a bad thing. Emotions are beautiful. They connect us. They move us. They make life worth living. But when emotions become the only voice in the room when you're making choices, that's when things go sideways. That's when you send the text you'll regret at 2 a.m. That's when you walk away from the conversation that could have saved your relationship. That's when you invest in something because it felt exciting, not because it made sense. And look, you're not alone. Most people live their entire lives bouncing between emotional highs and lows, reacting to whatever comes their way. They're not driving the car, they're passengers in the back seat while their feelings grab the wheel. And honestly, it's exhausting. It's like being on a roller coaster you never bought a ticket for. But what if I told you there's another way? What if there's a system, a framework really, that lets you feel your emotions fully, but choose your responses consciously? What if you could become the kind of person who stays grounded when everyone around you is losing it? The kind of person who sees opportunity in chaos, who turns conflicts into connections, who makes decisions that actually align with the life they're trying to build. That's what we're diving into today. This isn't some cold, robotic approach to life. This is about building what I call a mental framework, a system that helps you process what you're feeling, understand what's really happening, and respond in a way that serves your future self, not just your present emotions. By the time you finish this, you'll have a blueprint for handling the most emotionally charged moments of your life with clarity, confidence, and intention. You'll know how to pause when everything in you wants to react. You'll learn how to see beneath the surface of what's triggering you. And most importantly, you'll discover how to make choices that feel right and are right. This isn't about suppressing who you are. It's about becoming more of who you're capable of being. Chapter 1. When Feelings Take the Wheel. Understanding the Emotional Override. Let's start with something we can all relate to. That moment when you completely lose it over something small. You know what I'm talking about. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and suddenly you're fuming for the next 20 minutes. A friend cancels plans last minute, and you're spiraling into thoughts about how nobody values your time. Your partner forgets to do something they promised, and boom, you're in a full-blown argument about things that happened 3 years ago. What just happened there? It's what I call the emotional override. It's that split second when your feelings hijack your entire decision-making system. One moment you're fine, and the next moment you're acting like someone you don't even recognize. Here's what's wild. This happens to everyone. The most successful, put-together people you know, they've been there too. The difference is that some people have learned to catch it before it takes over completely. And that's exactly what you're about to learn. Why we're wired this way. Your brain is ancient. Not you personally, your brain. The core parts of it that handle emotions were designed millions of years ago when our biggest concerns were not getting eaten by predators and finding food. Back then, if you saw a shadow move in the bushes, you didn't have time to sit down and analyze whether it was a threat. You needed to react, run, fight, freeze. Instant decision. That system saved our ancestors' lives. But here's the problem. That same system is now responding to your boss's email, your friend's comment, or your bank account balance with the same urgency it would respond to a lion chasing you. Your emotional brain doesn't know the difference between a physical threat and a psychological one. It just knows something feels wrong, and it floods your system with chemicals that scream, "Do something now." And that's where things get messy. Because in the modern world, most of our challenges aren't solved by running or fighting. They're solved by thinking clearly, communicating well, and making strategic choices. But when your emotional system is activated, clear thinking is the last thing your brain wants to do. The real cost of emotional decision-making. Let's get honest about what this is costing you. Think about the last time you made a big decision while you were emotionally activated, excited, angry, scared, whatever. How did that turn out? Maybe you quit a job in a moment of frustration, and 3 weeks later, you were kicking yourself. Maybe you said something in the heat of an argument that you can't take back. Maybe you invested money in something because everyone around you was hyped about it, and now you're staring at your bank account, wondering what you were thinking. The career opportunities you've walked away from because your pride was hurt. The relationships you've damaged because you couldn't control your reaction in the moment. The money you've lost because fear convinced you to pull out too early or greed convinced you to jump in too late. This isn't about beating yourself up. It's about recognizing the pattern. Most people live in what I think of as reactive mode. Something happens. They feel something, they do something, and then they deal with the consequences. Rinse and repeat, over and over. And here's the thing. You can know this is happening and still fall into it. You can be smart, self-aware, emotionally intelligent, and still get caught in the loop. Because knowing isn't enough. You need a system. You need a way to interrupt the pattern in real time. How the elite think differently. Let's talk about the people who seem to have it figured out. The ones who stay calm under pressure. The ones who can have a difficult conversation without it turning into a disaster. The ones who make decisions that consistently move their lives forward instead of sideways. Are they just built different? Are they naturally less emotional? Spoiler alert, nope. What they've figured out is this. Emotions aren't the enemy. Emotions are information, but they're not commands. Think about it like this. Your emotions are like a dashboard in your car. When the check engine light comes on, it's giving you important information. But you wouldn't just pull over and abandon the car on the side of the road, right? You'd assess what's happening, figure out what needs attention, and make a decision about what to do next. That's what successful people do with their emotions. They don't ignore them. They don't suppress them. They read them. They ask, "What is this feeling telling me?" And then, and this is the key part, they decide how to respond based on what's going to create the best outcome, not just what's going to relieve the immediate emotional tension. Let's say someone criticizes your work in front of other people. Your emotional brain is screaming, "Defend yourself! Make them look stupid! Walk out!" But your strategic brain, when you give it a chance to speak, might say, "Okay, that stung, but what if I ask a clarifying question? What if there's something useful in that feedback? What if how I respond right now determines whether people see me as defensive or as someone who can handle feedback like a pro?" See the difference? Both responses acknowledge the emotion, but one is reactive and the other is responsive. One is about making the feeling go away. The other is about making the situation better. The gap between stimulus and response. There's a quote I love from Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust. He said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." That space, that tiny gap between what happens to you and what you do about it, that's where everything changes. That's where your power lives. Most people don't even know that space exists. Something happens, and boom, they're already reacting. The trigger and the response feel like one continuous event. But they're not. There's a gap. It might be milliseconds, but it's there. And with practice, you can learn to widen that gap. You can learn to pause in that space and make a conscious choice about what happens next. That's what this whole framework is about. It's about learning to live in that space. It's about training yourself to recognize when you're being triggered, to pause instead of reacting, to analyze what's really going on beneath the surface, to choose a strategic response, and then to follow through even when every part of you wants to do something else. Chapter 2, The Framework Revealed, Your New Operating System. All right, let's get into the actual system. I'm going to break down a framework that you can use in any situation where your emotions are trying to take over. This isn't complicated. In fact, the simpler you keep it, the better it works. Think of this as installing new software in your brain. Right now, your default program is trigger to feeling to reaction. We're going to upgrade that to trigger to recognition, to pause to analysis, to strategy to response. Let me walk you through each piece. Stage 1. Recognition, catching it before it catches you. Recognition is about developing awareness of your emotional patterns before they take over. Most people only realize they're emotionally activated after they've already said or done something they regret. That's too late. The goal here is to get so familiar with your triggers that you can feel them coming. It's like learning to read the weather. Once you know what storm clouds look like, you don't get caught in the rain unprepared. Start paying attention to your body. Your body gives you clues before your mind even registers what's happening. Maybe your jaw tightens when you're getting frustrated. Maybe your chest feels tight when you're anxious. Maybe your hands start to sweat when you're nervous. These physical signals are your early warning system. Also, pay attention to your thoughts. When you start thinking in extremes, this always happens. They never listen. I can't do this. That's a red flag. Extreme thinking usually means your emotional brain is taken over. And finally, Notice your urges. When you feel the sudden impulse to send a message, to say something cutting, to walk away, to prove a point, pause. That urgency is almost always emotional, not strategic. Stage 2. Pause, creating space to think. Once you've recognized that you're being triggered, the next step is deceptively simple. Don't do anything yet. I know that sounds obvious, but think about how often you actually do this. Something happens. You feel something, and immediately you're moving, talking, texting, deciding, acting. The pause is about interrupting that automatic sequence. This doesn't mean you become slow or indecisive. It just means you're giving your rational brain a chance to catch up to your emotional brain. Even 3 seconds can make a difference. One of the simplest pause techniques is to take 3 deep breaths. Not to calm yourself down, though that might happen, but to create a literal break in the action. Another technique is to buy yourself time in conversations. You can say things like, "That's a good point. Let me think about that for a second." Or, "Help me understand what you mean by that." These phrases give you space without making you seem defensive or evasive. The pause isn't about suppressing your emotions. It's about preventing them from making decisions for you. Stage 3. Analysis. Getting to the truth. Now that you've paused, it's time to figure out what's actually happening. And I don't mean what your emotional brain is telling you is happening. I mean what's objectively, factually going on. This is where most people mess up. They skip straight from feeling to reacting, or they pause, but then just go with their first interpretation of events. But your first interpretation is almost always incomplete or biased. Here's a simple framework for analysis. Separate facts from stories. Facts are things that actually happened, observable, measurable, verifiable. She didn't respond to my text for 4 hours. That's a fact. Stories are the meanings you assign to those facts. She doesn't care about me. That's a story. It might be true. It might not be. But it's not a fact. Once you separate the two, ask yourself, what are some other possible stories that could explain the same facts? Maybe she was in back-to-back meetings. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she's dealing with something stressful and forgot to reply. You don't know which story is true yet, but recognizing that there are multiple possibilities helps you avoid making decisions based on assumptions. Another part of analysis is asking yourself, what do I really want here? Not just in this moment, but in the bigger picture. If your goal is to preserve the relationship, does snapping at this person move you toward that goal or away from it? If your goal is to advance in your career, does quitting in frustration serve that? Or does staying and addressing the issue strategically serve it better? Stage 4. Strategy. Choosing the best move. Okay, so you've recognized the trigger, paused to create space, and analyzed what's really going on. Now it's time to decide how you're going to respond. This is where you shift from being reactive to being strategic. You're no longer asking, what do I feel like doing? You're asking, what's the smartest move here? Strategy means considering multiple options and evaluating them based on outcomes, not just on how they feel in the moment. What are the possible ways you could respond? What are the likely consequences of each option? Which one gets you closest to what you actually want? Sometimes the strategic response is direct and assertive. Sometimes it's patient and understanding. Sometimes it's walking away. Sometimes it's leaning in. The point is, you're choosing based on what serves your goals, not based on what relieves your emotional tension fastest. And here's something important. The strategic response often won't feel satisfying in the moment. It might feel uncomfortable. It might feel like you're swallowing your pride or biting your tongue. But remember, you're not optimizing for how you feel in the next 5 minutes. You're optimizing for how your life looks in the next 5 months or 5 years. Stage 5, execution, following through. This is the hardest part. You know what you should do, but actually doing it when your emotions are screaming at you to do something else? That takes discipline. Execution is about commitment. Before you even enter a situation where you might get triggered, decide ahead of time how you're going to respond. Not how you hope to respond, how you will respond. For example, if you're going into a meeting where you expect criticism, commit in advance. I'm going to listen without interrupting. I'm going to ask clarifying questions. I'm going to thank them for the feedback. When the moment comes and you're feeling defensive, you'll have that commitment to fall back on. And look, you're going to mess this up sometimes. You're going to recognize the trigger, pause, analyze, choose the strategic response, and then do the emotional thing anyway. That's okay. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is progress. Every time you successfully execute on a strategic response, you're building the habit. You're rewiring your brain to default to this way of thinking. Chapter 3, Recognition in Real Life, Learning Your Emotional Patterns. Let's get practical. Recognition is the foundation of everything else, so we're going to spend some real time here. Because if you can't catch yourself before the emotional hijacking happens, none of the other stages matter. The first thing you need to do is conduct what I call an emotional inventory. For the next week, just pay attention. Don't try to change anything yet. Just notice. When do you get angry? What specific situations trigger frustration for you? What makes you anxious? What situations make you feel defensive or attacked? What gets you overly excited to the point where you make impulsive decisions? Keep a simple log. You don't need anything fancy. Just jot down. What happened? What did I feel? How did I respond? How did it turn out? Most people are shocked by what they discover when they actually pay attention. They realize they have the exact same argument with their partner every month. They notice they get defensive every single time someone questions their work, even when it's constructive feedback. They see that they avoid certain types of conversations because they're afraid of conflict, even though avoiding the conversation makes things worse. The patterns become obvious once you start looking for them. Your emotional fingerprint. Here's the thing. Everyone has their own unique set of triggers. What sets you off might not bother someone else at all, and vice versa. There's no universal list of triggers. You have to figure out your patterns. Some people get triggered by feeling micromanaged. Others get triggered by feeling ignored. Some people spiral when they don't have a clear plan. Others get anxious when things are too structured. Some people can handle direct criticism but fall apart at passive-aggressive comments. Others are the opposite. Your job is to map out your emotional fingerprint. What are your top 5 triggers? For each one, What does it look like when it shows up? What physical sensations do you feel? What thoughts run through your head? What do you typically do when you're hijacked by that trigger? Let me give you an example. Let's say one of your triggers is feeling unheard. The situation might be you share an idea in a meeting and someone talks over you or dismisses it without really listening. The physical sensation might be a tightness in your chest and heat rising in your face. The thoughts might be, they don't respect me, or why do I even bother? The typical action might be shutting down for the rest of the meeting or getting passive-aggressive later. Once you map this out, you have a blueprint. The next time you're in a meeting and you start to feel that tightness in your chest, you'll recognize it. Oh, I'm being triggered. I'm feeling unheard right now. And because you recognize it, you have a chance to pause instead of reacting. Physical warning signs. Your body is smarter than you think. It picks up on threats, real or perceived, before your conscious mind catches on. That's why you'll sometimes feel anxious or uneasy without knowing why. Your body is responding to something it noticed that your mind hasn't processed yet. Learning to read your body's signals is like having an early warning system. Here are some common ones. Tension in your shoulders, neck, or jaw. Shallow or rapid breathing. Feeling heat in your face or chest. Butterflies or tightness in your stomach, clenched fists or fidgeting hands, feeling restless or unable to sit still. These aren't just random sensations. They're your nervous system gearing up for action. When you notice them, it's a sign that your emotional brain is starting to take over. The key is to catch these signals early. The earlier you catch them, the easier it is to engage your rational brain before the emotional brain fully hijacks the situation. Thought patterns. That signal emotional thinking. Your thoughts also give you clues. When you're thinking clearly and strategically, your thoughts tend to be nuanced and open. When you're emotionally activated, your thinking becomes rigid and extreme. Watch out for these thought patterns. All or nothing thinking. This always happens. I never get what I want. Everyone thinks I'm catastrophizing. This is going to ruin everything. I can't handle this. It's all falling apart. Mind reading. They think I'm incompetent. She doesn't care about me. He's doing this to hurt me. Personalizing. This is happening because of me. I'm the problem. They're targeting me specifically. When you notice yourself thinking in these patterns, it's a red flag. It doesn't mean your feelings aren't valid. It just means your emotional brain is coloring your perception of reality. And that's when you need to pause and analyze more carefully. Chapter 4. The Power of the Pause. Creating Space When Everything Feels Urgent. Let's talk about something that sounds incredibly simple, but is one of the hardest skills to master. Doing nothing. Not forever. Just for a moment. Just long enough to let your thinking brain catch up to your feeling brain. The pause is where your power lives. It's that tiny sliver of space between what happens to you and how you respond. And here's what's wild. Most people go their entire lives without ever consciously using it. They live in a constant state of stimulus response, like a pinball bouncing from one reaction to the next. But once you learn to pause intentionally, it changes everything. Because in that pause, you get to choose, and choice is freedom. Why pausing feels impossible. Let me guess. Right now, part of you is thinking, yeah, pausing sounds great in theory, but in the moment, when I'm actually triggered, there's no way. I get it. Because here's what your brain is doing when you're emotionally activated. It's convinced you that you need to act right now. It's screaming at you that if you don't respond immediately, something terrible will happen. You'll lose the argument. You'll look weak. You'll miss the opportunity. The other person will win. This is your ancient survival wiring kicking in. Remember, your emotional brain was designed for life or death situations. When a threat appeared, you didn't have time to pause and consider your options. You had to move now. But here's the reality. Almost nothing in modern life is actually that urgent. The email can wait 5 minutes. The argument doesn't need to be resolved in the next 30 seconds. The decision doesn't have to be made right this second. You have more time than you think. And even when you genuinely don't have much time, you almost always have enough time for a 3-second pause. 3 seconds. That's all it takes to interrupt the automatic reaction and give your strategic brain a fighting chance. Techniques for pausing under pressure. So how do you actually do this when your emotions are running hot? Let me give you some practical techniques that work in real-world situations. The 3-breath reset. This is the simplest and most effective pause technique. When you feel triggered, take 3 slow, deep breaths. Not to calm yourself down, though that might happen, but to create a physical break in the action. As you breathe, you're literally giving your brain a few extra seconds to engage the rational thinking centers. Here's the key. Make your exhale longer than your inhale. Breathe in for a count of 4. Breathe out for a count of 6. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which helps counteract the fight or flight response. The verbal buy-in. In conversations, you can create pauses by using phrases that give you time to think. Instead of immediately responding, try. That's interesting. Give me a second to think about that. Help me understand what you mean by that. Before I respond, can you tell me more about... I want to give this the thought it deserves. Can we revisit this in an hour? These aren't stalling tactics. They're strategic moves that demonstrate respect for the conversation while giving your brain space to engage. The physical interrupt. Sometimes you need to physically remove yourself from the triggering situation. Excuse yourself to the bathroom. Step outside for a moment. Get up to grab a glass of water. This isn't about running away from the problem. It's about giving yourself space to reset before you engage. I've seen people save relationships, careers, and deals by simply saying, "I need a minute, I'll be right back." That pause can be the difference between saying something you can't take back and responding in a way that actually solves the problem. The perspective shift. Here's a powerful mental technique. When you feel triggered, imagine you're watching the situation happen to someone else. If you were advising a friend in this exact scenario, what would you tell them to do? This simple shift, from being inside the emotion to observing it from the outside, can give you instant clarity. It's like stepping out of the movie you're in and watching it from the audience. Suddenly, you can see things you couldn't see when you were caught up in it. The myth of immediate response. We live in a culture that glorifies quick responses. We admire people who are fast on their feet, who have a comeback for everything, who make split-second decisions. And sometimes that's valuable. But more often than not, it's a trap. The reality is that most important decisions in life benefit from at least a moment of reflection. The best leaders aren't the ones who react fastest. They're the ones who take the time to understand what's really happening before they respond. Think about the last time you made a decision you regretted. Chances are you made it quickly, under emotional pressure, without giving yourself time to think it through. And think about your best decisions, the ones you're proud of. I'd bet most of those came after you took time to pause and consider your options. Here's what I want you to understand. You almost always have more time than you think. Even when someone is standing in front of you demanding an immediate answer, you can say, "Let me think about that for a moment." Even when you're in the middle of a heated conversation, you can take 3 seconds to breathe before you speak. And if someone gets upset with you for pausing, that's actually valuable information. It tells you they're trying to pressure you into an emotional reaction rather than a thoughtful response, which means pausing is exactly what you need to do. Building the pause habit. Like any skill, pausing gets easier with practice. Start small. Look for low-stakes situations in your daily life where you can practice inserting a pause. Stuck in traffic? Instead of immediately getting frustrated, pause. Take 3 breaths. Notice the frustration without acting on it. Someone says something mildly annoying? Instead of immediately snapping back, pause. Count to 3. Then respond. See a notification on your phone that makes you anxious. Instead of immediately clicking on it, pause. Take a breath. Then decide if you actually need to engage with it right now. These small moments are training opportunities. Every time you successfully pause in a low-stakes situation, you're building the neural pathways that will serve you in high-stakes situations. You're proving to yourself that you can create space between trigger and response. And that builds confidence. Over time, pausing becomes automatic. You won't have to force it. Your brain will start inserting that pause naturally because it's learned that pausing leads to better outcomes. Chapter 5. Analysis. Seeing what's really happening beneath the surface. Okay, so you've recognized the trigger and you've paused. Now comes the part where most people mess up, figuring out what's actually going on. Because here's the thing, your emotional brain is terrible at analysis. It jumps to conclusions. It fills in gaps with assumptions. It takes incomplete information and builds entire stories around it, and then it treats those stories as if they're absolute truth. Your job in the analysis phase is to slow down and separate what you know from what you're assuming. To look beneath the surface of the triggering event and understand what's really driving the situation. Facts versus stories. The most important distinction. Let me walk you through a simple but powerful framework. Separating facts from stories. Facts are objective, observable, verifiable. They're what a video camera would capture. My boss sent me an email asking to meet tomorrow. That's a fact. Stories are the meanings you assign to those facts. My boss is unhappy with my work and is going to fire me. That's a story. It might be true. It might be completely wrong. But it's not a fact. It's an interpretation. The problem is Our brains blur these together. We feel something, we interpret the situation, and then we react as if our interpretation is definitely true. And sometimes it is. But more often than not, we're reacting to a story we made up, not to the actual facts of the situation. Here's how to practice this. Next time you feel triggered, write down or mentally separate what actually happened, just the facts. The story I'm telling myself about what happened. Other possible stories that could explain the same facts. Let's try an example. You text a friend and they don't respond for 6 hours. Fact, they didn't respond to my text for 6 hours. Story, I'm telling myself, they're mad at me. They don't value our friendship. They're avoiding me. Other possible stories, they've been in back-to-back meetings all day. They saw the text but forgot to respond because they got distracted. Their phone died or they didn't have service. They're dealing with something stressful and haven't had mental space to respond yet. See the difference? You don't know which story is true. But by acknowledging that multiple stories could explain the same facts, you prevent yourself from making decisions based on assumptions that might be completely wrong. The iceberg principle. What's hidden beneath the surface? Most triggering situations are like icebergs. What you see on the surface, the comment someone made, the thing that happened, is just a tiny fraction of what's actually going on. The bulk of it is hidden beneath the water. When someone snaps at you, the surface-level fact is that they used a harsh tone. But beneath that, maybe they're stressed about something else entirely. Maybe they're dealing with financial pressure, relationship problems, health issues, or work stress that has nothing to do with you. When you find yourself in conflict with someone, the surface-level issue might be about who's going to handle a particular task. But beneath that, maybe it's really about feeling unappreciated or needing more autonomy or fear of failure. The analysis phase is about asking yourself, what else might be going on here that I'm not seeing? What could be driving this person's behavior? What unmet need or fear might be underneath their actions? This doesn't mean you excuse bad behavior or ignore problems. It means you understand them more fully so you can respond more effectively. Understanding your own deeper patterns. But here's the part people often miss. This applies to you too. When you get triggered, there's usually something deeper going on beneath the surface of your reaction. You're not just mad that your partner forgot to do the dishes. You're feeling unappreciated, or you're worried that you're carrying too much of the load, or you're stressed about other things. And this became the thing that broke the dam. You're not just frustrated that your colleague questioned your idea. You're worried about looking incompetent, or you're sensitive about being challenged because of past experiences, or you're carrying insecurity about whether you're good enough at your job. When you can identify what's really driving your emotional reaction, the deeper need, fear, or value underneath, you can address the actual issue instead of just reacting to the surface trigger. Ask yourself, what is this situation touching on for me? What does this remind me of? What am I really afraid of here? What do I need that I'm not getting? The timeline perspective. Another powerful analysis tool is zooming out and looking at the situation in context. Most emotional reactions feel incredibly urgent in the moment, but when you look at them from a broader timeline, they often shrink in significance. Ask yourself, how will I feel about this tomorrow? In a week? In a year? Is this part of a bigger pattern, or is it an isolated incident? What led up to this moment? What context am I missing? Sometimes this reveals that what feels like a crisis is actually a minor blip. Other times, it reveals that what seems like a small issue is actually the latest symptom of a much bigger problem that needs addressing. Either way, the timeline perspective helps you respond proportionally instead of over or underreacting. Asking better questions. The quality of your analysis depends on the quality of the questions you ask yourself. Most people ask reactive questions. Why is this happening to me? Why are they being like this? How can I make this feeling go away? But those questions keep you stuck in emotional mode. Strategic questions move you toward solutions. What outcome do I actually want here? What information am I missing that would help me understand this better? What would need to happen for this situation to resolve in a way that works for everyone? If I step outside my own perspective, how might this look different? What's one thing I could do right now that would make this situation better instead of worse? These questions shift your brain from problem-focused to solution-focused, from victim mode to agent mode, from reactive to strategic. Chapter 6. Strategy. Choosing your response based on outcomes, not feelings. All right, you've recognized the trigger. You've paused to create space. You've analyzed what's really happening. Now comes the moment of truth, deciding what you're actually going to do. This is where you shift from being someone who just manages their emotions to someone who uses logic and strategy to create the outcomes they want. This is where you stop being a passenger in your own life and start being the driver. The strategic question. What do I actually want? Before you decide how to respond to any situation, you need to answer one question. What outcome am I trying to create here? Not, what do I feel like doing? Not, what would feel satisfying right now? But what result do I actually want to walk away with? Most people skip this step. They react based on their immediate feelings, whether that's anger, fear, excitement, or hurt, without considering where that reaction will actually take them. Let's say someone criticizes your work in front of other people. Your emotional impulse might be to defend yourself aggressively or to shut down and withdraw. But what do you actually want here? Maybe you want to be seen as someone who can handle feedback professionally. Maybe you want to preserve the working relationship. Maybe you want to understand if there's something valid in the criticism that you can learn from. Maybe you want to set a boundary about how feedback should be delivered in the future. Once you're clear on what you want, you can choose a response that moves you toward that outcome instead of just relieving emotional tension. Evaluating multiple options. Here's a trap most people fall into. They see only two options in any situation. The thing their emotions want them to do, or nothing. Someone insults you? You can insult them back, or you can stay silent. Those seem like the only options when you're emotionally activated. But when you pause and think strategically, you realize there are always more options. You could ask a clarifying question. You could address the behavior without attacking the person. You could redirect the conversation. You could use humor to diffuse tension. You could choose not to engage in the moment, but address it privately later. Train yourself to generate at least 3 possible responses to any triggering situation. Don't judge them yet. Just brainstorm. What are different ways you could handle this? Then evaluate each option. What are the likely short-term consequences? What are the likely long-term consequences? Which option moves me closest to the outcome I actually want? Which option aligns with the person I'm trying to become? This process takes you out of reactive mode and into strategic mode. You're no longer asking, "What should I do?" as if there's one right answer. You're asking, "Given what I want to achieve, what's the smartest move?" The alignment test. Does this serve my future self? One of the most powerful strategy questions you can ask is this: will my future self thank me for this decision? When you're emotionally activated, your brain is optimizing for right. Now, it wants to relieve the immediate discomfort, express the immediate feeling, or satisfy the immediate urge. But your strategic brain can consider the version of you that exists tomorrow, next week, next year. That angry email you want to send right now? Will you be glad you sent it tomorrow? That investment you're excited about? Will you feel smart about it in 6 months? That conversation you're avoiding? Will avoiding it actually make your life better? Or will it just delay an inevitable problem? Your emotional self and your future self often want different things. Your job is to advocate for your future self even when your emotional self is throwing a tantrum. Risk assessment. What's the downside? Strategic thinking isn't just about pursuing the upside, it's about understanding and managing the downside. Before you commit to a response, ask yourself, what's the worst-case scenario if this backfires? Maybe confronting someone could damage the relationship beyond repair. Maybe staying silent could allow a problem to grow until it becomes unfixable. Maybe jumping into an opportunity could cost you resources you can't afford to lose. This isn't about being paranoid or negative. It's about making informed choices. Sometimes the potential downside is manageable, and the response is worth the risk. Other times, the potential downside is too steep, and you need to find a different approach. The goal isn't to avoid all risk. The goal is to take calculated risks where you've thought through the potential consequences and decided they're worth it. Timing, strategy, when to act, and when to wait. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Timing matters as much as what you do. Sometimes the strategic move is to address something immediately while emotions are still hot and the moment feels important. Other times, the strategic move is to wait until emotions have cooled and rational conversation is possible. Sometimes you need to act quickly to prevent a problem from growing. Other times, rushing in makes things worse, and patience is the power move. There's no universal rule here. You have to assess each situation individually, but ask yourself, is there a legitimate urgency here or just emotional urgency? Will this conversation be more productive now or later? Do I need more information before I respond? Am I in the right mental state to handle this effectively right now? Strategic patience is a superpower. When everyone around you is reacting immediately, the person who says, "I want to think about this and get back to you," often ends up making the best decision. The reversibility test. Here's a question that cuts through a lot of noise. If the roles were reversed, how would I want the other person to handle this? This question forces you to step outside your own perspective and consider the situation from the other side. And often, it reveals whether your planned response is actually strategic or just ego-driven. If you wouldn't want someone to speak to you the way you're about to speak to them, that's a sign you need to reconsider your approach. If you'd want someone to give you the benefit of the doubt, maybe you should extend that same courtesy. This isn't about being soft or avoiding conflict. It's about being consistent and fair. It's about responding in ways that you could defend to yourself and others, not just in the heat of the moment, but when you look back on it later. Chapter 7. Execution. Following through. When every fiber of your being wants to do something else. Here's where the rubber meets the road. You've done all the mental work. You've recognized the trigger, paused to think, analyzed what's really happening, and chosen a strategic response. You know what you should do. But now you're standing at the edge of actually doing it, and every cell in your body is screaming at you to do the opposite. This is the moment where most people fail, because knowing what to do and actually doing it are two completely different things. And this is where emotional discipline separates people who talk about growth from people who actually grow. The gap between knowing and doing. Let's be real for a second. You've probably known for a while what you should be doing in certain situations. You know you should stay calm when you're criticized. You know you should have that difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. You know you should respond thoughtfully instead of defensively, but knowing doesn't make it easy. In fact, sometimes knowing makes it harder, because now you're watching yourself fail to do the thing you know you should do, and that adds a layer of frustration on top of everything else. So, what's the secret? How do you actually follow through on strategic responses when your emotions are pulling you in a completely different direction? The answer is, you make the decision before you're in the emotional moment. You commit in advance when your rational brain is fully online, and then you execute that commitment even when it feels uncomfortable. Pre-commitment. Deciding before you're triggered. Think about a situation you know is coming up, a difficult conversation, a high-pressure meeting, a negotiation, whatever. Before you walk into that situation, when you're calm and thinking clearly, decide exactly how you're going to respond when you get triggered. Not, I hope I'll stay calm. Not, I'll try to be professional. But specific, concrete commitments. When they criticize my work, I will take 3 breaths, thank them for the feedback, and ask for specific examples. When I feel the urge to defend myself, I will pause and ask a clarifying question instead. When the conversation gets heated, I will take a break rather than saying something I'll regret. Write these commitments down if you need to. Say them out loud. Make them as specific as possible. Because when you're in the moment and your emotions are activated, your rational brain goes offline. But if you've already made a clear commitment, you can fall back on that commitment even when clear thinking is difficult. The discomfort principle. Here's something you need to understand. The strategic response is almost always going to feel uncomfortable in the moment. Staying calm when you want to explode? Uncomfortable. Speaking up when you'd rather stay silent? Uncomfortable. Addressing conflict when you'd rather avoid it? Uncomfortable. Admitting You were wrong when your pride is hurt? Very uncomfortable. But here's what you need to remember. Discomfort is not danger. Just because something feels hard doesn't mean it's wrong. In fact, the discomfort is often a sign that you're growing, that you're doing something different from your default programming. Your emotional brain interprets discomfort as a threat. It wants you to do whatever makes the discomfort go away fastest. But your strategic brain knows that temporary discomfort often leads to better long-term outcomes. So when you feel that resistance, that voice in your head saying, just react, just say what you're thinking, just do what feels natural, recognize that as your emotional brain trying to regain control, and then do the strategic thing anyway. Micro commitments, starting small. If the idea of executing perfectly in high-stakes situations feels overwhelming, start smaller. Practice in low-stakes situations first. Stuck in line at the grocery store? Instead of getting irritated, practice staying calm and taking 3 breaths. Someone makes a mildly annoying comment? Instead of snapping back, practice pausing and responding thoughtfully. Get a frustrating email? Instead of firing off an immediate response, practice waiting an hour before you reply. Every small win builds the neural pathways that serve you in bigger moments. Every time you successfully execute a strategic response, even in a situation that doesn't matter much, you're proving to yourself that you can do this, and that builds confidence and momentum. The voice in your head. When you're trying to execute a strategic response, there's going to be a voice in your head arguing with you. It's going to say things like, "This is fake. You're not being authentic. They don't deserve a calm response. You're letting them win. This is weak. Just say what you really think." That voice is your emotional brain trying to convince you to go back to reactive mode. And here's the thing. You don't have to argue with it. You don't have to make it go away. You just have to decide that you're not going to let it make your decisions for you. Acknowledge the voice. Yep, part of me really wants to blow up right now. And then follow through on your commitment anyway. But I'm choosing to respond strategically because that serves my goals better. Physical techniques for execution. Your body can help your brain follow through. When you're about to execute a strategic response and your emotions are pulling you the other way, use physical techniques to support yourself. Breath work. Before you speak, take 1 slow, deep breath. This interrupts the automatic reaction and reminds your body that you're in control. Posture. Adjust your body language to match the energy you want to project, not the energy you're feeling. Stand tall, relax your shoulders, maintain eye contact. Your body language influences your mental state, and it also influences how others perceive you. The pause. Hand. Some people find it helpful to physically touch something. Press their feet into the ground. Place their hand on their heart. Grip the edge of a table as a tactile reminder of their commitment to stay grounded. When you mess up, because you will, let's be honest, you're going to fail at this sometimes. You're going to recognize the trigger, pause, analyze, choose the strategic response, and then do the emotional thing anyway. That's okay. That's part of the process. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is progress. When you mess up, don't spiral into self-judgment. Instead, do a quick after-action review. What triggered me? At what point did I lose the strategic thread? What could I do differently next time? What can I do now to repair any damage? Sometimes the most strategic move is to circle back after you've calmed down. Hey, I reacted poorly earlier. Can we revisit that conversation? I want to handle it better. That's not weakness. That's self-awareness and maturity. And it often strengthens relationships rather than damaging them, because people respect someone who can own their mistakes and course correct. Chapter 8. The Influence Advantage, Using Strategic Thinking to Connect and Persuade. Once you've mastered managing your own emotional responses, something interesting happens. You become dramatically better at understanding and influencing other people. Because here's the thing, while you're learning to think strategically, most people around you are still operating on emotional autopilot. And that gives you a massive advantage. Not in a manipulative way, but in a way that lets you connect more deeply, communicate more effectively, and guide situations toward outcomes that work for everyone. Reading the room, emotional intelligence in action. When you're not caught up in your own emotional reactions, you can actually see what's happening with other people. You can read body language, tone of voice, and subtle shifts in energy that you'd miss if you were stuck in your own head. You start to notice, this person is saying they're fine, but their shoulders are tense and they're avoiding eye contact. Something else is going on here. Or everyone's nodding along, but nobody's actually engaged. We need to shift the energy in this conversation. Or this person isn't attacking me. They're scared and trying to protect themselves. If I respond to their fear instead of their words, we can get somewhere. This level of awareness is only possible when you're not being hijacked by your own emotions. When you're grounded and clear-headed, you can hold space for other people's emotions without getting swept up in them. The bridge between emotion and logic. Here's something most people don't understand about influence. You can't convince someone of something through logic alone if they're emotionally invested in a different position. Think about the last time you tried to change someone's mind about something they felt strongly about. Did you present them with facts and data and expect them to immediately see things your way? How did that go? Probably not well. Because people make decisions emotionally and then justify them logically. If you want to influence someone, you need to connect with their emotions first, and then give them the logical framework to support the decision you want them to make. This is where your strategic thinking becomes incredibly powerful. You can acknowledge and validate someone's feelings. I can see why this situation is frustrating for you, without getting emotionally entangled in it yourself. And once they feel heard and understood, they're much more open to considering different perspectives. Strategic questioning, the art of guiding without controlling. One of the most powerful influence tools is asking questions instead of making statements. When you're not emotionally reactive, you can ask genuine questions that help people think more clearly about their own situations. Instead of saying, "You're wrong about this," you can ask, "What would need to be true for that to work?" Instead of saying, "You should do X," you can ask, "What do you think would happen if you tried X?" Instead of defending your position, you can ask, Help me understand what concerns you most about this approach. These questions do two things. They make the other person feel respected and heard, and they guide them toward considering angles they might not have thought about on their own. The beauty of strategic questioning is that people are much more likely to act on conclusions they reach themselves than on advice you give them. So instead of telling them what to do, you ask questions that help them discover it for themselves. Managing difficult conversations without getting pulled in. Let's talk about what happens when someone is angry at you or hostile or trying to provoke a reaction. Most people either get defensive and escalate the conflict, or they shut down and withdraw. But when you're operating from a strategic place, you have a third option: stay calm and redirect. When someone is angry, they're usually not angry about the surface level thing they're yelling about. They're angry about something deeper, feeling disrespected, feeling unheard, feeling scared or overwhelmed. Your job isn't to defend yourself against their words. Your job is to understand what's driving their reaction and address that. You can say things like, "I can see this is really important to you. Help me understand what you need here." It sounds like you're frustrated. What would a good resolution look like for you? I hear you. What can we do to make this situation better? Notice how none of those responses are defensive. You're not arguing about who's right or wrong. You're acknowledging their emotional state and moving toward solutions. This takes practice because your instinct will be to defend yourself or match their energy. But when you can stay grounded while someone else is emotionally activated, you become the calm in the storm. And that gives you influence, the power of validation. Here's something that will change your relationships. People don't actually need you to agree with them. They need you to understand them. When someone shares a concern or a feeling, and you immediately jump to problem solving or disagreeing or explaining why they shouldn't feel that way, what you're communicating is your feelings aren't valid. But when you pause and say, "I can see why you'd feel that way," or "that makes sense given what you're dealing with," even if you don't agree with their conclusion, you're communicating, "I respect your experience." Validation doesn't mean agreement. It means acknowledgement. And once someone feels acknowledged, they're 10 times more likely to be open to hearing your perspective. Knowing when to walk away. Strategic influence also means recognizing when continuing a conversation isn't productive. Sometimes the most strategic move is to disengage. If someone is too emotionally activated to think clearly, pushing forward usually makes things worse. If someone is committed to misunderstanding you, no amount of explanation will help. If the conversation has become about winning rather than understanding, it's time to step back. You can do this gracefully. "I think we both need some time to cool down. Can we revisit this later?" Or, "I don't think we're going to resolve this right now. Let's take a break." This isn't giving up. It's recognizing that timing matters. And sometimes the strategic play is to pause and come back when both people are in a better state to engage. Chapter 9. Emotional Leverage. Turning your triggers into strategic assets. All right, here's where things get really interesting. Everything we've talked about so far has been about managing your emotional reactions. But what if you could go further? What if you could actually use your emotional sensitivity as a strategic advantage. Because here's the thing, your triggers aren't weaknesses. They're data. They're signals. And once you learn to read them correctly, they become some of the most valuable information you have. Your triggers are telling you something. Every emotional trigger you have is connected to something you care about. You get angry when you see injustice because you value fairness. You get anxious when things are uncertain because you value security and control. You get hurt when you feel dismissed because you value being heard and respected. These aren't character flaws. These are values, and values are powerful. They're what drive you, what motivate you, what give your life meaning. The problem isn't that you have these emotional responses. The problem is that you've been letting them hijack your behavior instead of using them as information. So here's the shift. Instead of trying to eliminate your emotional triggers, learn to translate them. When you feel a strong emotional response, ask yourself, what is this feeling trying to protect? What value is being threatened here? Once you understand that, you can respond in a way that actually honors your values instead of just reacting to the trigger. From weakness to superpower, let's take some common triggers and see how they can become strategic advantages. If you get triggered by disorganization, that sensitivity can make you exceptional at creating systems, optimizing processes, and catching problems before they escalate. Instead of just getting frustrated when things are messy, you can channel that energy into building structure that helps everyone. If you get triggered by being ignored or dismissed, that sensitivity can make you highly attuned to when others feel unseen. You can become the person who notices when someone's being talked over in a meeting, who makes space for quieter voices, who builds inclusive environments. That's a leadership superpower. If you get triggered by uncertainty, that sensitivity can make you excellent at risk assessment, contingency planning, and preparing for multiple scenarios. Instead of just feeling anxious, you can become the person who thinks ahead and helps others navigate ambiguity. See the pattern? The same emotional sensitivity that causes problems when you're reactive becomes an asset when you're strategic. Using emotional energy as fuel, emotions are energy. When you get angry, frustrated, excited, or scared, you feel a surge of energy in your body. Most people either suppress that energy or let it explode in unproductive ways. But you can learn to channel it. You can take that emotional intensity and direct it towards strategic action. Feel angry about an injustice? Use that fire to fuel persistence. Channel it into advocacy, into building solutions, into changing systems. Feel anxious about an upcoming challenge? Use that nervous energy to fuel thorough preparation. Channel it into research, practice, and planning. Feel excited about an opportunity? Use that enthusiasm to fuel momentum. Channel it into action, into building, into creating. The emotion provides the energy. Your strategic thinking provides the direction. Together, they're unstoppable. Reading other people's emotional patterns. Once you understand your own emotional triggers, you get much better at understanding other people's. You start to recognize, oh, this person gets defensive when they feel their competence is being questioned. If I want to give them feedback, I need to lead with acknowledgement of what they're doing well. Or, this person shuts down when they're overwhelmed. If I want to solve a problem with them, I need to break it into smaller pieces and go slow. Or, this person gets excited and makes impulsive decisions. If I want them to commit to something important, I need to help them think through the implications before they jump in. This isn't manipulation. This is understanding how people work and communicating in ways that actually land. It's meeting people where they are instead of expecting them to communicate the way you do. Emotional patterns. As early warning systems, your emotional triggers can also serve as early warning systems for problems that haven't fully emerged yet. If you're consistently getting triggered by the same type of situation across different contexts, that's valuable information. It might mean there's a deeper issue you need to address. It might mean you need to set clearer boundaries. It might mean you need to make a bigger change in your life or work. Pay attention to patterns. If you're always frustrated at work, that's not a character flaw. It's a signal that something about your work situation isn't aligned with your values or needs. If you're always anxious in a particular relationship, that's not overthinking. It's your intuition telling you something's off. Your emotions are trying to help you. The question is whether you're listening to them strategically or just reacting to them blindly. The advanced move, teaching others. Once you've mastered the art of turning your triggers into assets, you can help others do the same. And this is where your influence really multiplies. When someone on your team gets triggered, instead of judging them or telling them to calm down, you can help them understand what's driving their reaction and how to channel it productively. I can see you're frustrated. What's underneath that frustration? What do you care about here that's not being honored? And then, okay, so how can we address that core issue strategically instead of just reacting to the surface problem? This is how you build teams and relationships where emotional intelligence isn't just tolerated, it's leveraged, where people's sensitivity becomes their strength rather than their liability. Chapter 10. Building Unshakable Mental Discipline, Making Strategic Thinking Your Default Mode. Here's the ultimate goal. You want strategic thinking to become so automatic that you don't have to consciously choose it anymore. You want to get to the point where pausing before reacting feels as natural as breathing, where analyzing situations clearly is just how your brain works, where choosing strategic responses is your default setting, not something you have to force yourself to do. This is the difference between someone who knows about strategic thinking and someone who embodies it. And the gap between those two things? Consistent practice and mental discipline. The compounding effect of small wins. Here's what most people don't realize. You don't need to be perfect at this. You don't need to nail it every single time. You just need to be slightly better today than you were yesterday. Because growth compounds. Every time you successfully recognize a trigger before it hijacks you, you're strengthening that neural pathway. Every time you pause instead of reacting, you're making pausing easier next time. Every time you choose a strategic response over an emotional one, you're building the habit. Think of it like working out. You don't go to the gym once and come out ripped, but if you go consistently, even if each workout feels small, the cumulative effect is transformation. Mental discipline works the same way. The key is consistency, not intensity. It's better to practice this framework in small moments every single day than to try to apply it perfectly in one high-stakes situation once a month. Daily training, turning life into practice. Your entire life is a training ground. Every minor frustration, every small inconvenience, every momentary irritation, these are all opportunities to practice. Stuck behind someone driving slowly? Practice recognizing the frustration, pausing, and choosing to stay calm. Get a work email that annoys you? Practice not responding immediately. Wait 30 minutes. See if your perspective shifts. Someone says something that could be taken as a dig? Practice assuming positive intent and responding graciously. These moments feel insignificant, but they're not. Each one is a rep in your mental discipline training. And the more reps you get in low-stakes situations, the stronger you'll be when high-stakes situations come up. Creating environmental support. You can't rely on willpower alone. Your environment needs to support your goals. If you're constantly surrounded by chaos, urgency, and emotional reactivity, it's going to be exponentially harder to maintain strategic thinking. So design your environment intentionally. Physical space. Create spaces where you can think clearly. Maybe it's a specific chair where you go to process decisions. Maybe it's a morning routine that starts your day in a grounded state. Maybe it's keeping your workspace organized so you're not constantly dealing with visual chaos. Information diet. Be intentional about what you consume. If you're constantly scrolling through outrage-inducing content, your brain is being trained to react emotionally. If you're consuming thoughtful, nuanced content, your brain is being trained to think strategically. Choose wisely. Social environment. Surround yourself with people who support strategic thinking. This doesn't mean avoiding emotional people. It means spending time with people who challenge you to think clearly, who don't just validate your reactive impulses, who model the kind of discipline you're trying to build. The power of reflection. One of the most underrated practices for building mental discipline is regular reflection. Taking time, daily, weekly, whatever works for you, to review how you're doing. Ask yourself, when did I successfully use strategic thinking this week? When did I fall back into reactive mode? What patterns am I noticing? What's one thing I want to improve going forward? This isn't about beating yourself up for failures. It's about building awareness and course correcting. You can't improve what you're not aware of. Some people journal. Some people just think through these questions during a walk. Some people talk them through with a friend or mentor. The format doesn't matter. What matters is that you're consistently reflecting on your patterns and adjusting your approach. Building stress tolerance. Here's a reality check. You're going to face situations where you're tired, stressed, overwhelmed, and under pressure. And in those moments, your mental discipline is going to be tested. So part of building unshakable discipline is deliberately practicing under stress. Not all the time. You need recovery too. But periodically, put yourself in situations that push you. Take on a challenging project that's outside your comfort zone. Have the difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Make yourself speak up in a situation where you'd normally stay quiet. Each time you maintain strategic thinking under stress, you're proving to yourself that you can handle it. And that builds confidence. you start to trust yourself in ways you didn't before. Recovery and maintenance. But here's the other side of that coin. You can't be on all the time. Mental discipline isn't about being a robot. It's about being intentional. And intention requires energy. Make sure you're taking care of the basics: sleep, nutrition, movement, downtime. When you're running on empty, your emotional brain takes over because your rational brain doesn't have the resources to function properly. Think of mental discipline like a muscle. You can work it hard, but then it needs rest to recover and grow stronger. If you're constantly pushing without recovery, you'll burn out. And burnout doesn't lead to growth. It leads to regression. When the system breaks down, even with all this practice and discipline, there will be times when the system breaks down. Times when you fall completely back into reactive mode. Times when you know better, but do it anyway. And when that happens, don't spiral. Don't make it mean that you've failed or that the system doesn't work. Just treat it as data. What were the conditions that led to the breakdown? Were you exhausted? Were you dealing with multiple stressors at once? Did you skip parts of the process? Did you encounter a trigger you haven't prepared for? Understanding the conditions that lead to breakdowns helps you prevent them in the future. Maybe you need better self-care. Maybe you need to set clearer boundaries. Maybe you need to prepare more thoroughly for certain situations. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is resilience, the ability to bounce back quickly when you mess up and keep moving forward. Chapter 11, Real-World Applications, Using Strategic Thinking in High-Stakes Situations. All right, let's get practical. Let's talk about how this framework actually shows up in the moments that matter most. Because theory is great, but what you really need to know is, how do I use this when everything's on the line? In your career, navigating professional challenges. Let's say you're in a meeting and someone publicly challenges your idea. Your emotional brain is screaming, "Defend yourself!" Your face is getting hot. Your heart rate is up. Here's what strategic thinking looks like in that moment. Recognition. I'm feeling defensive. My chest is tight. I want to prove them wrong. Pause. Take a breath. Don't respond immediately. Analysis. What's actually happening here? Are they attacking me, or are they raising a legitimate concern? What do I want the outcome of this meeting to be? Do I want to be right, or do I want to solve the problem? Strategy. The strategic move is to acknowledge their point, ask clarifying questions, and show that I can collaborate rather than compete. Execution. That's a fair concern. Can you tell me more about what specifically worries you about this approach? Maybe we can find a way to address that. See what just happened? You didn't suppress your emotions. You felt them fully, but you didn't let them drive your behavior. And as a result, instead of creating conflict, you created collaboration. Instead of looking defensive, you looked professional and team-oriented. That's the kind of moment that builds your reputation. That's the kind of response that makes people want to work with you on important projects. That's how careers are built. In negotiations, staying grounded when stakes are high. Negotiation is where emotional reactivity costs people thousands, sometimes millions, of dollars. Because when you're negotiating, the other side is often trying to trigger you. They're using pressure tactics, artificial urgency, or emotional manipulation to get you to make decisions that favor them. But when you can stay strategic, you have a massive advantage. Let's say you're negotiating salary for a new job. They make an offer that's lower than you expected. Your emotional response might be disappointment, frustration, maybe even anger. You might be tempted to either accept it because you don't want to seem difficult or to get aggressive and demand more. Strategic thinking says, okay, I'm disappointed, I expected more. But let me not react to that feeling. Let me analyze. What's the full compensation package? What's negotiable and what's not? What's my walkaway point? What's the best way to frame a counteroffer that serves both of us? Then you respond, thank you for the offer. I'm excited about the opportunity. Based on my research and the value I'll bring, I was expecting something in the range of X to Y. Can we talk about how we might bridge that gap? Calm, professional, strategic, and much more likely to result in a better outcome than reacting emotionally. In relationships, handling conflict without damage. Personal relationships are where emotional reactivity does the most damage. Because with people you're close to, the stakes feel higher, the triggers run deeper, and the consequences of reacting poorly can last years. Let's say your partner does something that hurts your feelings. Maybe they forgot something important to you. Maybe they said something dismissive. Your emotional response is hurt, anger, maybe a desire to hurt them back or withdraw completely. Strategic thinking looks like this. Recognition. I'm hurt. I want to shut down or lash out. Pause. Before you respond, take a moment. Maybe even leave the room for a minute. Analysis. What's underneath my hurt? Do I feel unimportant? Unappreciated? Is this part of a pattern, or is this an isolated incident? What do I actually need here? Strategy. I need to express how I'm feeling without attacking them. I need to help them understand the impact of their actions, and I need to see if they're willing to repair this. Execution. Hey, can we talk? When you specific behavior, I felt emotion because impact. I need specific need. Can we figure out how to handle this better going forward? This isn't about being soft or avoiding conflict. It's about addressing the issue in a way that strengthens the relationship instead of damaging it. It's about creating understanding instead of just venting feelings. In financial decisions, avoiding emotionally driven mistakes. Money is one of the areas where emotions cause the most damage. Fear and greed drive terrible financial decisions. People sell investments in a panic when markets drop. They buy things they can't afford because they're excited or trying to impress others. They avoid necessary expenses because of scarcity mindset. Strategic thinking in financial decisions means separating how you feel from what makes sense. Let's say the market crashes and your investments lose 20% of their value. Your emotional response is panic. You want to sell everything to stop the bleeding. Strategic thinking says, okay, I'm scared. That's understandable. But let me not make decisions from that fear. What's my actual financial situation? What's my timeline? Have the fundamentals of my investments changed, or is this just normal market volatility? What do the people I trust advise? What would future me want me to do right now? Often, the strategic response is to do nothing, or even to buy more while prices are low. But that requires overriding the emotional impulse to act on fear. In parenting, responding instead of reacting. If you're a parent, you know how triggering kids can be. They push boundaries, they test limits, they act out when they're tired or overwhelmed, and it's so easy to react emotionally, to yell, to punish harshly, to say things you don't mean. But strategic thinking in parenting looks like recognizing, I'm frustrated right now. I'm about to yell, but what do I actually want? I want my kid to learn and grow, not just to obey out of fear. What's driving their behavior? Are they tired, hungry, feeling insecure? What response from me will actually teach them something useful? And then responding from that place instead of from frustration. This doesn't mean being permissive. It means being intentional. In crisis, thinking clearly when everything's falling apart. And then there are the moments of real crisis, when something goes seriously wrong, when you're getting terrible news, when everything feels like it's falling apart. This is where strategic thinking becomes a lifeline. Because when everyone around you is panicking, the person who can think clearly becomes the leader. The person who can see past the immediate chaos and identify what actually needs to happen right now. In crisis, the framework simplifies. What's actually happening right now? Not what might happen, not worst-case scenarios. What's real right now? What's the most important thing to address immediately? What resources do I have available? What's the first action I can take? Strategic thinking in crisis doesn't mean you're not scared or stressed. It means you don't let the fear paralyze you or drive you to make things worse. You feel the fear, acknowledge it, and then focus on what you can control. Chapter 12. Peak Performance Under Pressure. Operating at your best when it matters most. Let's talk about what happens when the pressure is at its absolute maximum, when failure has real consequences, when everyone's watching, when there's no room for error. This is where everything you've learned gets tested, and this is where the difference between someone who knows strategic thinking and someone who embodies it becomes crystal clear. Pressure changes everything. Under normal circumstances, thinking strategically is manageable. You have time. You have space. You can work through the framework methodically. But under extreme pressure, everything compresses. Time feels like it's speeding up. Your body is flooded with stress hormones. Your rational brain is fighting just to stay online. And your emotional brain is screaming louder than ever. This is when most people revert to their default programming. All the strategic thinking goes out the window, and they fall back into pure reaction. But masters operate differently. They've trained so consistently that strategic thinking is their default programming. They don't have to force it. It's automatic. The simplified framework for high-pressure moments. When you're under extreme pressure, you don't have bandwidth for the full 5-stage framework. You need a streamlined version that you can access even when your cognitive resources are maxed out. Here's the simplified version. 1. Breathe. Literally, 1 conscious breath. This interrupts the panic response and gives your rational brain a fighting chance. 2. What matters most right now? Not everything that feels urgent. What actually matters? What's the highest leverage action you can take? 3. Act on that. Not on the panic, not on the emotion, on the strategic priority. That's it. 3 steps. Breathe, prioritize, act. It sounds simple, but in the moment, when everything in you is screaming to just react, executing these 3 steps takes discipline. Pre-game preparation. Setting yourself up for success. The best way to perform under pressure isn't to be better in the moment, it's to be better before the moment. Before you walk into a high-stakes situation, do your mental prep. Visualize success, not in a woo-woo manifestation way. In a practical way, walk through the situation in your mind. Imagine the challenges that might come up. Imagine yourself responding strategically to each one. Make your commitments. Decide in advance how you'll respond when specific triggers show up. If they say X, I'll respond with Y. If I start feeling Z, I'll take 3 breaths and refocus. Ground yourself physically. Do whatever helps you feel calm and centered. Some people exercise, some people meditate, some people listen to music. Find what works for you and do it before high-pressure situations. During the storm, staying centered in chaos. When you're in the middle of it and everything's intense, your job isn't to eliminate the pressure. Your job is to perform despite the pressure. Here's what helps. Focus on what you can control. You can't control how other people respond. You can't control external circumstances. But you can control your own thoughts, words, and actions. Put 100% of your attention there. Trust your preparation. You've done the work. You know what to do. Don't second-guess yourself in the moment. Execute what you've prepared. Use your body. Stand tall. Breathe deeply. Relax your shoulders. Your physical state influences your mental state. Control your body, and your mind will follow. One moment at a time. Don't think about the next hour. Think about the next minute, the next conversation, the next decision. Break it down into manageable pieces. The recovery process. Bouncing back after intensity. Peak performance under pressure is taxing. You can't sustain it indefinitely. So after intense periods, you need to recover intentionally. This means different things for different people. Maybe it's physical activity to discharge the stress hormones. Maybe it's time alone to process. Maybe it's connecting with people you trust. Maybe it's just sleep. Whatever it is, don't skip this step. If you try to maintain intensity without recovery, you'll burn out. And burnout destroys your ability to think strategically. Learning from high-pressure experiences. Every time you go through a high-stakes situation, you have an opportunity to get better, but only if you actually reflect on it. After the pressure is over and you've had time to recover, review. What went well? What did I do that I want to repeat? What didn't go well? What would I do differently? What surprised me? What did I learn about myself? How can I prepare better for similar situations in the future? This reflection turns experience into wisdom. Without it, you're just repeating the same patterns. With it, you're constantly evolving and improving. The confidence that comes from proven capability. Here's the beautiful thing about consistently performing well under pressure. It builds unshakable confidence. Not the fake confidence that comes from pretending you have it all together. The real confidence that comes from knowing you've faced difficult situations and handled them well. From knowing that when things get hard, you don't fall apart. You rise to the occasion. That's the kind of confidence that changes how you show up in life. You stop avoiding challenges because you're afraid you can't handle them. You start seeking out opportunities that push you because you know you'll grow from them. And other people feel that confidence. They start coming to you when things get difficult because they know you can handle it. They trust you with more responsibility because they've seen you perform under pressure. This is how careers accelerate. This is how leadership emerges. This is how you become the person others rely on when it matters most. Chapter 13. Building Systems that Support Strategic Thinking. Creating Environments where Clarity Thrives. Here's something most people miss. Individual mastery is powerful, but systemic mastery is transformative. When you build systems in your work, your relationships, your life, that support strategic thinking, you multiply your impact exponentially. Because you're not just changing how you operate, you're changing the environment around you in ways that make strategic thinking easier for everyone. The power of environmental design. Think about your physical environment for a moment. Is it set up to support clear thinking, or does it create constant chaos? Some people work in spaces that are cluttered, noisy, and full of distractions. And then they wonder why they can't think clearly. Others create intentional spaces, organized, calm, designed for focus. And they find that strategic thinking becomes much more accessible. But environmental design goes beyond just physical space. It includes time design, how you structure your days and weeks. Do you protect time for deep thinking, or are you constantly in reactive mode, bouncing from one urgent thing to the next? Information design, what you consume and when. Do you start your day scrolling through outrage-inducing content that puts you in a reactive state? Or do you start with something that centers you and helps you think clearly? Social design, who you spend time with and in what contexts. Are you surrounded by people who model strategic thinking or people who pull you into drama and reactivity? You can't control everything about your environment, but you can be intentional about the pieces you do control. And those intentional choices compound over time. Creating decision-making protocols. One of the most powerful systems you can build is a protocol for how you make important decisions. Most people approach every decision differently, which means they're constantly starting from scratch. But when you have a protocol, a consistent process, you make better decisions with less mental effort. Here's an example of a simple decision-making protocol. For minor decisions, low stakes, easily reversible. Trust your gut. Don't overthink it. Make a choice and move on. For moderate decisions, some stakes, somewhat reversible, sleep on it. Give yourself 24 hours before committing. See if your perspective shifts. For major decisions, high stakes, hard to reverse. Use the full strategic framework. Write out your analysis. Talk it through with people you trust. Give yourself at least a week before deciding. The specific protocol doesn't matter as much as having one. Because when you have a protocol, you don't have to make meta decisions about how to make decisions. You just follow the process, which frees up mental energy for the actual thinking. Building strategic thinking into team culture. If you lead a team, whether at work, in your family, or in any group setting, you have an opportunity to build strategic thinking into the culture. This starts with how you run meetings. Most meetings are chaotic, reactive, and unproductive. But you can change that. Set clear intentions. Before any important discussion, Clarify. What outcome are we trying to create? What decision needs to be made? What information do we need? Create space for thinking. Don't expect people to analyze complex situations on the spot. Give them time to think. Let's all take 5 minutes to write down our thoughts before we discuss. Separate idea generation from evaluation. Don't shoot down ideas as soon as someone suggests them. Gather all the options first, then evaluate them. Model strategic questioning. Instead of declaring positions, ask questions that help the group think more deeply. What are we assuming here? What would need to be true for this to work? What are we not considering? When you consistently model this approach, others start adopting it. Strategic thinking becomes the norm, not the exception. Communication standards that support clarity. Another system you can build is around communication standards. How do people in your team or family talk about problems, give feedback, and resolve conflicts? Most groups have no explicit standards, which means everyone defaults to their own reactive patterns. But you can create agreements. We separate facts from interpretations. Before we react to a situation, we clarify what actually happened versus what we think it means. We assume positive intent. Unless we have clear evidence otherwise, we start from the assumption that people are doing their best. We address issues directly. Instead of complaining to others or letting resentment build, we have difficult conversations with the actual person involved. We focus on solutions, not blame. When something goes wrong, our first question is, how do we fix this? Not, whose fault is this? These might sound simple, but they are transformative when actually practiced. They create an environment where strategic thinking can thrive. Building accountability without judgment. One of the challenges with building systems is ensuring people actually follow them. And the way most people handle accountability creates defensiveness and resistance. But there's a better way. Build accountability systems that are supportive, not punitive. This might look like regular check-ins where people reflect on how they're doing with strategic thinking, not to judge or criticize, but to learn and improve. What situation this week challenged your strategic thinking? How did you handle it? What would you do differently next time? Or it might look like having a trusted person who can give you feedback in real time. Someone who can pull you aside and say, "Hey, I noticed you got really reactive in that meeting. Want to talk about what was going on?" The goal isn't perfection. The goal is growth. And growth happens in environments where people feel safe to be honest about their struggles. Measuring what matters. Finally, build ways to track whether your systems are actually working, not in an obsessive data for data's sake way, but in a practical, is this making things better way. Maybe you track how often team conflicts get resolved constructively versus escalating. Maybe you track how many major decisions you make that you feel good about 6 months later. Maybe you track how often you successfully use strategic thinking in triggering situations. The specific metrics don't matter as much as having some way to see if you're moving in the right direction. Because what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed improves. Chapter 14, Advanced Troubleshooting. Solving the problems that keep coming up. Even after you've been practicing strategic thinking for a while, you're going to hit obstacles. Situations where the framework doesn't seem to work. Patterns where you keep falling back into reactivity despite your best efforts. This chapter is about diagnosing and solving those persistent problems. Problem number 1, analysis paralysis. Some people get so good at analyzing situations that they never actually make decisions. They get stuck in endless loops of considering options, weighing pros and cons, and gathering more information. If this is you, the solution is to set decision deadlines. Give yourself a specific amount of time to analyze. Could be an hour, could be a week, depending on the decision. And when that time is up, you choose, even if you don't feel 100% certain. Remember, strategic thinking isn't about finding the perfect answer. It's about making the best decision you can with the information you have and then adjusting as you go. Problem number 2, emotional bypassing. On the flip side, some people become so focused on being logical that they start ignoring valuable emotional information. They pride themselves on being rational, but they've actually just become disconnected from important signals. If this is you, the solution is to reintegrate emotional awareness into your analysis. Emotions aren't the enemy. They're data. Ask yourself, what is this feeling trying to tell me? What need or value is this emotion highlighting? You don't have to act on every emotion, but you should be listening to them. Problem number 3, social pressure override. You might be great at strategic thinking when you're alone, but the moment you're in a group, you revert to reactivity. Social pressure, whether it's explicit or just implied, makes it hard to stick to your strategic choices. If this is you, practice saying things like, I need to think about that before I respond. Or, that's a good point. Let me consider it and get back to you. You don't need to make decisions in real time just because others expect you to. And often, when you model thoughtful decision-making, others respect it more than they respect quick reactions. Problem number 4, trigger stacking. Sometimes you can handle one trigger just fine. But when multiple triggers hit at once, you're tired, stressed, dealing with multiple challenges, your strategic thinking falls apart. If this is you, the solution is better self-care and earlier intervention. When you notice you're getting depleted, take action before you hit empty. Rest. Delegate. Say no to non-essential commitments. Protect your resources so you have them when you need them. Problem number 5, perfectionism. Trap. Some people become so committed to strategic thinking that they beat themselves up every time they have an emotional reaction. And that self-judgment creates additional emotional stress, which makes strategic thinking even harder. If this is you, practice self-compassion. You're human. You're going to have emotional reactions. The goal isn't to never feel things. It's to not let feelings hijack your behavior. When you mess up, treat yourself like you'd treat a good friend who's learning something new. Okay, that didn't go the way I wanted. What can I learn from this? What will I try differently next time? Problem number 6, context switching. Difficulty. Maybe you're great at strategic thinking at work, but terrible at it at home, or vice versa. You can't seem to apply the framework consistently across different areas of your life. If this is you, recognize that different contexts require different calibrations of the same framework. The core principles stay the same, but the execution looks different. At work, strategic thinking might mean staying professional and solution-focused. At home, it might mean being more vulnerable and emotionally present. Both are strategic. They're just optimized for different environments. Problem number 7, declining returns. Sometimes people find that strategic thinking works great initially, but over time it becomes less effective. They're going through the motions, but not getting the results. If this is you, it's time to refresh your approach. Maybe you've gotten too rigid with your framework and need to adapt it. Maybe you've stopped really paying attention and started operating on autopilot. Maybe the situations you're facing have changed and require different strategies. Step back and reassess. What's working? What's not? What needs to evolve? Chapter 15, The Strategic Life, Living as Someone Who Thinks Clearly and Acts Intentionally. We've covered a lot of ground: framework, techniques, applications, troubleshooting. But let me bring it all home with what this actually looks like in practice. What does life look like when strategic thinking becomes your default way of operating? You become unshakable. Not in the sense that nothing bothers you, but in the sense that when things do bother you, you don't get swept away by them. You feel your feelings fully, but you choose your responses consciously. People start to notice this about you. They comment on how calm you seem under pressure, how you always seem to know what to say in difficult situations, how you handle challenges that would overwhelm others. And the truth is, you're not superhuman. You're just operating from a different framework. While others are being hijacked by their emotions, you're processing them strategically. And that makes all the difference. Your relationships transform. When you stop being reactive in relationships, everything changes. Conflicts that used to spiral into disasters get resolved constructively. Conversations that used to end in hurt feelings become opportunities for deeper understanding. People feel safer with you because they know you won't lash out at them. They trust you more because you're consistent and thoughtful. They come to you with their problems because they know you'll help them think clearly instead of just validating their reactivity. This doesn't mean you become a doormat. It means you become someone who can hold boundaries, speak truth, and address difficult issues, all while maintaining respect and care for the relationship. Your career accelerates. Strategic thinking is one of the most valuable skills in any professional context. People who can stay calm under pressure, make good decisions in complex situations, and navigate conflicts constructively are rare and valuable. You start getting opportunities that others don't because people trust you with important, challenging work. You get promoted not just because you're good at your job, but because you're someone who makes everyone around you better. And the crazy part, it doesn't feel like you're doing anything special. You're just applying the framework you've learned. But to others, it looks like leadership. You stop living in constant stress. One of the biggest shifts that happens when you master strategic thinking is that life stops feeling like an endless series of crises, because you're not treating every trigger like an emergency. You still face challenges, you still deal with difficult situations, but they don't overwhelm you the way they used to. You have a process for handling them. You trust yourself to figure things out. and that creates a baseline of calm that fundamentally changes your quality of life. You start teaching others. As you get better at this, you'll find yourself naturally helping others develop these skills, not in a preachy way, just in the way you respond to situations, the questions you ask, the perspective you offer. And this is where your impact really multiplies, because every person you help think more strategically goes on to influence others. The ripple effect extends far beyond what you could accomplish alone. You live in alignment. Perhaps the most profound shift is that your actions start aligning with your values in ways they never did before. Because when you're not being driven by emotional reactions, you can make choices based on what actually matters to you. You stop doing things out of guilt, fear, or people-pleasing. You start doing things because they align with the life you're trying to build and the person you're trying to become. And that alignment creates a sense of integrity and peace that's hard to describe but impossible to miss once you experience it. Conclusion: the journey forward. So here we are. You've learned a framework for replacing emotional reactions with strategic responses. You understand how to recognize triggers, pause before reacting, analyze situations clearly, choose strategic responses, and execute even when it's uncomfortable. But understanding isn't the same as embodying. Knowledge isn't the same as mastery. The real work starts now. The work of actually applying this in your daily life. The work of practicing in small moments so you're ready for big ones. The work of building systems that support strategic thinking. The work of staying committed even when it's hard. This is a lifetime practice. Here's what I want you to understand. You're never done with this. Strategic thinking isn't a destination you reach and then coast. It's a practice you commit to for life. There will always be new triggers to navigate, new situations that challenge you, new contexts where you need to apply these principles differently. And that's okay. That's actually the point. Every challenge is an opportunity to deepen your mastery. Every time you successfully apply strategic thinking, you're strengthening the neural pathways that make it easier next time. Every time you mess up and recover, you're building resilience. Start small, but start now. If you're feeling overwhelmed by everything we've covered, remember, you don't have to master everything at once. Start with one piece. Maybe start with just noticing your triggers. For the next week, just pay attention to when you get emotionally activated. Don't try to change anything yet. Just notice. Or maybe start with pausing. Next time you feel triggered, take 3 breaths before you respond. That's it. Just that one practice. Pick the piece that feels most accessible to you right now and start there. Build that one habit until it feels natural. Then add another piece. Find your people. This journey is easier when you're not doing it alone. Find people, whether it's one person or a community, who are also working on developing strategic thinking. Share your struggles. Celebrate your wins. Hold each other accountable. Learn from each other's experiences. The people you surround yourself with will either support your growth or pull you back into reactivity. Choose wisely. Be patient with yourself. You're going to mess this up a lot. You're going to recognize triggers too late. You're going to react when you meant to pause. You're going to choose strategic responses and then not follow through. And that's okay. That's part of the process. What matters isn't perfection, it's persistence. Keep showing up. Keep practicing. Keep learning from your mistakes. Every small win counts. Every moment where you catch yourself before reacting is a victory. Every time you choose strategy over emotion, you're building the person you want to become. The life waiting for you. On the other side of this work is a life that most people never experience. A life where you're in control of your responses instead of being controlled by your reactions. Where you make decisions that align with your values instead of your immediate feelings. Where you build relationships based on understanding instead of conflict. Where you create outcomes instead of just dealing with consequences. That life is available to you. Not someday. Not when you're perfect at this. Right now. Starting with the next moment where you feel triggered and choose to pause instead of react. The framework is simple. The practice takes discipline, but the results are transformative. You have everything you need to become someone who thinks clearly, acts intentionally, and lives strategically. The only question is, will you commit to the practice? Because the world needs more people who can stay grounded when everyone else is losing it. More people who can see solutions where others see only problems. More people who can lead with clarity instead of reacting with chaos. That person can be you. That person is you. You just have to practice being them consistently enough that it becomes your default way of operating. So take a breath, recognize where you are right now, and take one intentional step toward the person you're becoming. The rest will follow.